Good evening and welcome to QandA. I'm Tony Jones, and answering your questions tonight, Labor Senator Sam Dastyari, Senator-elect Pauline Hanson, whose One Nation party will win at least 3 Senate spots and she believes could win 7. Greens Deputy Leader Senator Larissa Waters, Minister for Education and Liberal Senator Simon Birmingham, and Nick Xenophon, who will now lead a team of 3 senators. Please welcome our panel. Well, as usual, you can watch Q&A live across Australia on ABC TV News 24 and listen on News Radio. And we're streaming Q&A live on Facebook, where you can watch, you can make a comment, or you can ask a question. Let's go to our first question in the audience from PRABA SEKHAR.
From the recent attacks we have seen in France yet again, it is evident that there is a rise in homegrown terrorism, where boys and girls are being radicalised from a young age, with consequences that we've seen here in Australia with the death of Curtis Cheng in Parramatta. My question to the panel tonight is, do you put forward any strategies for early intervention to curb these individuals from going down that path and committing these abhorrent acts of terror?
Larissa Waters, we'll start with you.
Thanks, Tony. Look, that's a really pertinent and fantastically phrased question, PRABA. We absolutely need to intervene so that young people or any people aren't radicalised, and I believe that we can do that. We've had some wonderful social cohesion programs previously in this nation, some of which were sadly defunded when the Abbott government first came to power. But I believe it's not too late. I think we have a fantastic and strong multicultural community in Australia that we can build on and further strengthen. What I'm concerned about is the fanning of the flames of fear and divisiveness. I think that will not make us safer. In fact, it will make us less safe. We need to make sure that everyone feels included and welcomed and a part of our community. That's how we keep safe and strong. And if we demonise people, isolate them, call them names, fearmonger, then we simply push young people towards radicalisation. Now, that's a task for all of us to not participate in that sort of divisive, inflammatory and totally incorrect language and conduct. And it's going to be a very interesting parliament in that regard.
Pauline Hanson.
Quite interesting what you were saying, Larissa, and I'm sure that was pointed at me about demonising. It is a huge issue in Australia, and we haven't had terrorism on our streets before. It's just in these last decade that we have experienced it, and we are experiencing it around the world. You've got to ask yourself then, what's behind it? And why is it happening? I haven't got all the answers. But the thing is that you've got to deal with why the radicalisation is happening, why people want to go out and create terror, to destroy lives, create murder and fear on our streets. I haven't started this. This has been happening for many years now. And we have terrorist attacks that's happening around the world. To bury your head in the sand is not the answer to it. Radicalisation is not just happening by fear-mongering, by words, because I'm asking for a debate and find the right answers. This is happening on the internet, it's happening around the world because people, either for whatever reason, are drawn to a religion or an ideology that is not compatible with the Western way of life, and is having an impact on our culture and our way of life. I'm concerned for every one of you here in this audience tonight and everyone at home, because I want safety on our streets. I want to find the right answers. And it's important for each and every one of us and for the future generations. To ignore it is not the answer to it. To think that we can find the easy answers, it's not. But pulling together as a community and as a nation to debate the issue, then we can find the right answers.
Pauline, we'll come back to what you believe some of those answers are in a minute. Sam Dastyari.
Look, there's so much there to unpack that we'll have plenty of time to do, I hope, tonight. This issue of radicalisation is a real problem and it's a real concern. And you have to ask yourself, why would there be young Australians that have grown up here and been part of our society that feel so alienated, so disincluded from our society that they take these kinds of extreme steps. Now, we have a responsibility to make sure the right Muslim voices are being promoted. We have a responsibility to acknowledge that there is a problem, but we also have a responsibility to make sure that we're not fanning the flames of extremists who want nothing more than for Muslims in Western nations to feel uncomfortable about being there. That is the path to division. That is the path we cannot go down.
Simon Birmingham.
Well, thanks, PRABA, for the question. And look, really the first point is prevention. Prevention for new migrants comes from having successful resettlement services, supporting those migrants in terms of learning English if that's necessary, supporting them in terms of accessing training to help them get into the employment market. For homegrown radicals, that of course really involves making sure that through our schooling programs and education system there is strong sense of inclusion, again strong pathways and hope that people will be able to succeed and fulfil their aspirations of work and opportunity. But of course where those things don't work, where prevention doesn't work, then the battle becomes one of identification and intervention. And we have been taking steps to make sure that in our schools there's greater support for teachers and the school community to identify risks and threats, that there's that understanding in communities, particularly Islamic communities where we all acknowledge there is a particular potential problem, for those communities to feel comfortable, family members, leaders in communities, to refer young people who they think may be at risk of radicalisation to authorities, because we want to make sure that we get those early interventions in place. And the types of changes we've made to laws in recent years have allowed more of those types of early interventions to occur to prevent the types of atrocities that we've seen overseas largely from occurring in Australia. Not completely, sadly, but we have had success through the types of strategies that we've been deploying today.
Okay, and Nick Xenophon, and we'll hear everyone just briefly and then we'll get into what will be a debate, I guess.
In direct answer to the question, of course we need to do more in terms of counter-radicalisation programs. I think Senator Connie Ferranti-Wells, I think both sides of politics, all sides of politics have said she's done terrific work in the past in terms of de-radicalisation programs and engaging with all communities. But I think there's a two-pronged approach. More on de-radicalisation, also to look very closely at why some events have occurred, and I think there's been a failure in terms of policing or intelligence. It's still beyond me why man Haron Monis was on the streets when he was and did what he did. And I think that points to some systemic failures which the coroner, New South Wales coroner, is going through. But in answer to your question, I think that the key to this is that you marginalise the extremists and the preachers of hate, not an entire community. And in terms of the broader issue about Islam, the world's biggest Islamic nation happens to be Indonesia, our neighbour to the near north, where they have had stunning success in becoming a democratic country in the region, and I think we should all be very proud of that. And it's an example of a nation predominantly Muslim, where they've done tremendous things in terms of being a strong democracy with a strong free press. Okay, let's go straight to our next question. It's from Cindy RAHAL. Go ahead.
Hi, my question is for Pauline. Now, you've called for a royal commission into Islam to determine whether Islam is a political ideology or a religion. Can you please explain what constitutes a religion and what constitutes a political ideology, and why Judaism, Christianity fall under the banner of a religion, even though Islam, Judaism and Christianity all stem from the Abrahamic faith?
Islam does not separate itself from political ideology. And whereas the Christianity, under the Westminster system, we separate the rule of law from the state. So they are separate. Islam doesn't. And a lot of the countries that are ruled under Islam is their ideology, the political ideology. Now, I understand Islam does not believe in democracy, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, or freedom of the press. You have Hizb ut-Tahrir that preaches the fact that they will want total control of the people
Pauline, can I just interrupt you there? I mean, can you make such a blanket statement, Islam doesn't believe in democracy, when north of Australia is the biggest democracy in our region and it's Islamic?
Exactly.
No, look, I don't believe that. I don't believe that because you've got a lot of countries around the world, they have a political ideology that want to control the people. Now, I want to see a separation of the two.
You don't think that's true? You don't think that's true of Indonesia, though, do you?
I think they control the people and their beliefs. I really do. And the people are controlled by it. You know, we are a Christian country, and I don't believe that Islam is compatible with our culture and our way of life. And that's why we have problems in Australia on the streets. And a lot of people are opposing the mosques that are built here.
Can I just let Cindy RAHAL, I think, probably wants to get back in to answer. You've been listening to this. What do you think?
I think that Muslims in Australia have constantly been telling people like you and who support you that that is not what Islam is about, and it's falling on deaf ears. And I think you have very selective hearing, and what you're creating is not one nation, you are creating a divided nation. If you want to have a look at creating one nation, you need to look at ways we can include everybody, all the Muslims and any other religion as well. You have a very one-track mind, and unfortunately it's very dangerous.
We have terrorism.
Okay, thank you.
We have terrorism on the streets that we've never had before. We've had murders committed under the name of Islam, as we have the Lint Cafe, Curtis Cheng, and the 2 police officers in Melbourne. Right, so this has happened. You have
Can I just say,
radicalisation.
Pauline, I'm sure the fact checkers will be onto this, but when you say we've never had terrorism in this country before, that's simply not the case. The 1970s, there were multiple bombings by Croatian Catholic extremists. This has happened in Australia before. It's not the first time. We should at least get that straight.
All right, I accept that.
I'd just like to say that you're in a position now where you can make a change. I think you should use that position positively instead of driving this fear amongst the community. Why don't you look at domestic violence? Why don't you look at education? Why don't you look at health? You're in a position that many Australian women would envy you and would like to be in that same position. Why are you pushing this agenda and pushing fear into our community and making people like myself and my friend here worried to come into the studio because of protesters outside?
The protesters were nothing to do with me. The protesters were there against me.
Pauline.
Okay, Cindy, we're just going to let Pauline Hanson just quickly answer that. I'd like to hear from the other panellists as well. So, Pauline, a brief answer, if you wouldn't mind.
With what question about the protesters outside? The protesters were against me because I choose to speak up against this matter. So I have protesters which are trying to shut down freedom of speech. You know, I want answers to the questions. People in Australia are in fear because they can't walk in the streets. They're fear of terrorism, which is happening around the world. Why? Because of Islam. Because you have the radicalisation. We just all spoke about radicalisation is actually happening in Australia. Who is it under? On what religion? So-called religion. So we actually have to find the right answers to this so we can all live in peace and harmony.
Pauline, there's a lot of questions, so I'm going to go around the panel and get their response to that. Start with Sam Dastyari.
I'm just sorry, I'm a little bit flabbergasted here. The politics of fear, hate and division is not the politics that we should be espousing as a nation. And look, you know, Miss Hanson here is not an amateur. She's not inexperienced. Miss Hanson, you've been in politics now for 20 years. And you know exactly what you're doing and the language used and the power of your language. You know, 20 years ago, it started off with blaming Indigenous Australians. Then it became about we're being swamped by Asians. Now it's about blaming the Muslim and the Muslim community. It is the politics of pitting one section of our community against another section of our community, about simplifying complex problems and placing the blame on one group at one point in time. It's the politics of fear and division, and Miss Hanson, you're incredibly good at it.
Okay.
When you say we have radicalisation of problems in our country, yet then you put it back on me that I'm creating fear. So you're saying that terrorism and the fear on our streets so people don't feel safe in this country, or what's happened in Nice, or what's happened in Paris, or what's happened in Germany and other countries around the world, or America. So that's not actually happening.
I'm saying you play the politics of fear and hate because it serves your political interests, and you've been doing it for the past 20 years, and you're very good at it.
Can I just leave you two there for a minute? I want to hear from the other side of the panel, and we'll hear from Simon Birmingham first. The Royal Commission that was suggested in the question. I presume the government will rule that out.
Indeed, Tony. Now, Cindy wasn't. Cindy, I understand your concerns. Your concerns as a Muslim woman living in Australia, that you are worried, as I know many others are, about your place in Australia and the type of country we are in welcoming you. We also have to acknowledge there are around 500,000 Australians who voted for Pauline's party. They have worries, and many who didn't have worries about terrorism, about threats that exist. Our responsibility, I think, is of course how we reconcile that to make sure that you continue to feel that this is a country that you are free to practice your faith in, respected while practicing that faith, but that others equally feel safe and comfortable that the government is not only doing everything possible to protect them, but is being successful in doing so, and that we actually do create the type of environment where it doesn't matter what your religion is, what your background is, you actually are living as an Australian, in Australia, in a country that celebrates and recognises, as we have done for a long period of time as the world's most successful multicultural nation, celebrates and recognises those backgrounds. But we can't be blind to the fears that are there either, and to the fact that terrorism, Islamic terrorism, has become an increasing problem in pockets of the world, has threatened us in certain ways, and therefore we have to be ever vigilant in that, and ever vigilant in explaining calmly and rationally to Australians as to the types of steps we take to protect them so that we make sure we give that comfort to all Australians. OK,
but just a quick follow-up there. I mean, you talk about calm and rational conversation that needs to be had over this. Do you believe that a call for a Royal Commission, that a call for banning all Muslims from coming to Australia as immigrants, do you believe that falls into that category? Because that's part of the One Nation platform.
No, I don't think a Royal Commission would be at all helpful, and I don't think that bans on certain categories of people are ever helpful, Tony. So, the government's approach will absolutely be one to ensure everything we do in our powers to deliver safety and security for Australians. But that safety and security includes being a harmonious, welcoming country where all Australians feel free to live, worship, as long as they are living according to the laws of this land.
Larissa Waters, you can come in on this question.
Look, Cindy, can I thank you for your articulation, and can I apologise to you? I think what we've seen tonight is that many Australians don't share the views of some folk on this panel, and I do want to deeply apologise that you feel in any way discomforted or unwelcome in your own country. I think that is grossly unfair and utterly uncalled for. I think it's wonderful.
Are you apologising for the rest of the Australians who actually feel that
I do want to come to why I think people have voted for your party, Pauline, because I actually probably have a different perspective on that one. But just staying with Cindy, thank you. I have a bone to pick with Pauline in regards to your statement that we're a Christian nation. Actually, I think we're a multi-faith nation. Indeed, we're a nation of people who sometimes don't have a religion. I think we are a broad spectrum. We are diverse. That is our strength. That has been our strength ever since our formation. Clearly, we have some serious reconciliation and reparation to do with the first Australians, but we are strong in our diversity. Thank you. I also want to add that I think it's somewhat ironic that Ms Hanson is objecting that her freedom of speech is somehow being restricted because there's people protesting out the front of tonight's show, when in fact she's seeking to silence your freedom of speech and your freedom of religion, which I object to.
And Nick Xenophon, a brief answer, because we've got quite a few questions to get through.
Well, the brief answer is this: you cannot use the actions of a few to ascribe them to many hundreds of thousands of Australians who are here in this country because they want a good life, a peaceful life. They want their kids to have a good education. They want the opportunity that this great country has brought. And I'm very proud of the fact that my parents came from war-torn Europe over 60 years ago for a good life. And I think that's what 99.999% of those that come to this country actually want.
OK, Pauline Hanson referred to the scepticism among some Australians about Islam. Our next questioner, I think it's fair to say, shares that. Caroline Freckleton.
Good evening, panel, and thank you for the debate. It's been very interesting so far. With the proposed increases in Muslim refugees and probably the fairly rapid growth in the population of the Muslim group, a lot of Australians are concerned that many Muslims are not willing to fully integrate into our community. So my main question is, do you think politicians are being extremely arrogant or extremely naive in thinking they can change the 1400 years of indoctrination when integration has been largely a failure or resulted in only a barely tolerated coexistence wherever large Muslim populations exist in Western countries? And secondly, a minor question, but is the dinner for leaders of the Islamic community held by Prime Minister Turnbull recently evidence of the growing political power of that group? OK,
Simon Birmingham, the dinner first of all, and keep our answers brief if we can.
Well, the dinner first of all was, Caroline, a multi-faith dinner. Yes, and obviously did mark iftar, I think, from memory, but it was attended by leaders of many different faiths, and of course it was a reflection of the reality that if we are, firstly, to successfully ensure that all Australians live harmoniously alongside one another, we need to promote that type of respect across faiths. Secondly, a reflection of the reality that if our security and intelligence services, who are tasked with our protection in terms of identifying problems, are to succeed in their job, then they need, which means government needs, the cooperation of community leaders to make sure that those isolated instances are identified as quickly as possible.
Sam Daciara, I'll bring you in. The questioner asked whether politicians are being naive or extremely arrogant in relation to Islam.
I think we're being neither. Look, I look at this and I can't not but look at this from my kind of personal story. I was born in a small town in northern Iran. When someone like Sonia Kruger goes on this morning and talks about banning Muslims from coming to the country, or it's black and white in Pauline Hanson's policy document, what they're effectively saying is people like my parents shouldn't have been allowed to come to this country because of where they were born. And it's hurtful and it's painful. And I look at just what my parents, and not just them, but so many other Muslim Australians, so many other migrants, so many other, the hundreds of thousands of migrant stories. And when I look at, Ms Hanson, when I look at your policy document that turns around and says that we should be banning Muslims from coming to this country, I have to ask, does that mean that a 5-year-old Sam Dastiari should never have been able to set foot in Australia because somewhere in Tehran there's a document that sits that says beside my name the word Muslim because of where I was born?
Are you a Muslim?
Really?
Gee whiz.
Yeah, and I've never hidden away, no.
So were you sworn in under the Quran?
I was born in an Islamic nation, and by being born in an Islamic nation, I was born and under Iranian law, under Islamic law, under places like Iran, and my parents fled.
And you were
to be able to come to this country.
This is quite interesting. Are you practicing Muslim?
So what? Ms Hanson, I think you're trying to make a joke of what is a serious...
No, I'm surprised. I didn't know that about you.
What, because he doesn't have three heads?
What, because I don't have three heads? Ms Hanson, when you have a policy document that says in black and white we should be banning Muslims from coming to this country, I can't help but interpret it about what it means.
Well, I
for
think
people
we need
like
a
my family and the hundreds of thousands of migrants who've come from the Middle East and from around the world. Yes, it's very personal.
And you mentioned Sonia Kruger. I'm saying, go Sonia, because I think it's great that someone actually is standing up because she's expressed her feelings about it. She referred to Japan, that you know, for a population of, 127 million people who actually have 100,000, they don't have terrorism on their streets. You've got Brussels now, the biggest Muslim, state there with them, 300,000 in there. You've got 10% in France. You have the problems on the streets of France.
So you want to let
let
5-year-old Sam Dastyari into the country?
Oh,
No,
No, that's a serious question. Would you have allowed a 5-year-old Sam Dastyari into this country? I came to this country on the 16th of January 1988, 2 weeks before the bicentenary celebrations, and my family has done nothing but contribute to this country since they've been here. And yes, they came from a Muslim country.
I'm so happy that you've come here to Australia.
So, but Pauline Hanson, could you just answer the very basic question that he threw up there?
Is,
would you be happy to see him blocked from someone in his position now? Who's being persecuted in another country
that happens
to be a Muslim, would you be happy to see that 5-year-old blocked from coming here?
Muslims have been a part of Australia for a long, long time, many, many years, when you go back to the gold rush days and they were in here in Australia. But it's only in the last, 10, 20 years that we have seen a rise of terrorism on our streets. You've got to ask yourself the question, why? Why is it happening?
Because we invaded their countries, Pauline.
It's not about invading their countries.
We went to war with their nations and killed their people.
So that's the
Ms.
reason
Hanson,
why
a 5-year-old Sam Dastyari can't come to this country now, but I could have come 28 years ago.
Sam, we have problems now. To take it back there, that's absolutely ridiculous, what you're talking about. All right?
That is exactly what we're talking about. It's in your policy document. It's black and white in your policy document.
Sam, you're talking about something that's ridiculous back when? How long ago?
I came to this country 28 years ago.
That's 28 years ago. We're talking about now, what is happening now and today in the world with the terrorist attacks.
So today I couldn't come to this country.
All right, sorry,
28 years ago.
I'm going to put you both on hold because we've actually got... I'm going to come to our next question, which is from Khalid Elamar, because that will also feed into this discussion. Everyone can get involved in that. Khalid Elamar, go ahead.
Senator Hanson, my 11-year-old son, who was watching this program right now, recently asked me what is Islamophobia. Rather than explaining it to him with my own words, he and I sat down side by side and watched a few of your past and recent videos. Then I asked him, what do you think Islamophobia is? His response was, someone that hates us. I said Islamophobia is one or a combination of three things: hate, fear, or ignorance. I promised him that I will ask you this question so you can hear the answer from yourself. So with all due respect, Ms. Hanson, what is the basis of your Islamophobic feelings? Hate, fear, or ignorance?
None of the above of what you've just said, all right? What I'm concerned about, and your son may be watching, but also other children may be watching this as well, and who want to live in peace and harmony in this country without fear. It's about us getting on together as a nation and working together without fear amongst us. Why have we got so much fear on our streets? Why did the Link Cafe happen? Why did Curtis Cheng? Why is he murdered? Why is other things happening? Why are there terrorist attacks around the world? You know, we need to find the answers to this, and why the radicalisation. Why have we just recently had another 3 men wanting to leave this country, or 5 it was, to actually go and fight for ISIL?
Yeah, I say please go ahead.
Why? Simply because people like yourself, who have extremely dangerous and disturbing rhetoric, it's a fuel to hatred, bigotry and ignorance. You should listen to what you say.
No,
because your policies are simply a contradiction to your own One Nation party. You're not creating a One Nation party.
So
you
are
are creating a dysfunctional country by isolating a religion, 20 years ago, isolating a race, and you keep on going down this track. I will fear for my wife's life. I will fear for my kid's life.
Who is an Australian born?
I work in Cronulla. I have worked there for 8 years. I absolutely love the place. Only recently, after your rhetoric has come on board the media, almost every day, I get called a Muslim pig because of you.
No.
And I really do thank you for that, because it just shows how much of a better person I am that I can choose to ignore these guys and remain the person that
So, Pauline, can I just put this question to you? I mean, you know that Mr. Elamar's son is actually sitting watching this. He just told you that. Can you offer him any hope that you regard him as an equal Australian along with all other citizens?
There are a lot of Muslims, and there are actually Muslims of my party who have joined my party, who want a peaceful life in Australia. They don't want the terrorism. Isn't it funny that your Grand Mufti won't even come out and condemn the terrorist attacks that's happening overseas? Or imams or people that say that they have no intentions of assimilating into our society? Or when you have problems in communities because people are living in fear, why do you reverse it on me and say you're blaming me for the problems in Australia? When we have seen
Pauline,
what has happened...
Pauline, can I put this to you? Is it possibly because you've asked that no more mosques be built in this country, that you've asked that no more Muslims be allowed to enter this country?
Wasn't it the truth that...
but can I just put that question to you again about that young boy who's sitting watching this now?
About how it feels. But like I said to you...
Can you offer him any hope that you regard him as an equal citizen?
He is an equal citizen, as long as he wants to give his loyalty to this country and it's not torn by an ideology that has hatred towards the West or infidels.
Okay.
You know, you have problems that are happening around the world. Radicalisation is about hate for the infidels. You know, this hatred wasn't created by me. It's under the belief of the Islam. Read the Quran and what the Quran preaches in it. It's hatred. Even Ayan Hussein Ali has saying, and she's travelling the world, she's saying she was a Muslim. She said, be aware of what this is all about. If you want to sit here and just, I'll go back to the same thing.
It's just the politics of hate, Pauline. It's the politics of hate.
It is not the politics of hate.
It's the politics of division. It's the politics of disunity. And you played it for 20 years. Sam, it was Indigenous Australians, then it was Asians, now it's Muslims.
Because you've got the votes, because it's actually growing in numbers, Muslims in this country, that you
It was Indigenous, then it was Asians, now it's Muslims.
Okay, I'm going to pause the side of the panel again to hear from this side, and I'll start with Nick Xenophon.
Well, what's there to say? I mean, I think that...
well, you're going to be living in the Senate with a large number of One Nation, and you're a block of votes, so you're going to have to work out how to live together in the Senate.
And where there is common ground, if it's issues about Australian jobs, Australian-made, signing up to trade agreements which clearly aren't in our national interest, I will work.
Okay, what about the issues we're talking about? Does it concern you that the Senate may become a forum for this debate pushed by One Nation and others?
The Senate is a forum for matters that senators want to raise, and if senators and Ms Hanson's entitled to raise those issues. She's been duly elected. You need to respect that. It doesn't mean we can't have vehement disagreements about it, but respectful disagreements. And my view is that a message of unity, a message of people working together is one that will always triumph over one of division.
Simon Birmingham, the call for reform of Islam, which is coming not only from Pauline Hanson, but as she mentioned, from Ayan Hussein Ali and others, does that resonate with you?
Tony, I think reform of Islam depends, as always in these conversations, what do you mean when you say that? What are people talking about, and indeed what necessarily is the Islam perhaps that they are talking about in those conversations? Because you can talk about reform of the Catholic Church if you want, and you know the hierarchy you're pointing to. You could talk about perhaps reform of Islam in Australia, and you might be able to point to some leaders of the Islamic faith in Australia. But when you talk about it in a global context, I'm not sure that it makes a lot of sense to put it that way. I do want to say something, though, to Khalid, and that is the people who taunt you and abuse you deserve our condemnation. They deserve the condemnation of each and every one of us sitting on this panel. Just of course, as I would expect each and every one of us to condemn those who inspire acts of terrorism or hatred in any other direction. It is the hatred that we should be condemning and stamping out whomever it is directed at, whomever it is coming from, we want to make sure that that is what we are tackling. And by creating more hatred is only, of course, going to worsen the problem in years to come.
We've got another question on this subject. I'll quickly come to Mohammed Attai.
My name is Mohammed. Apparently I look like the Australian Idol Guy Sebastian. I love my religion, Islam, and have been to more mosques than I have the supermarket. Perhaps the greatest influence for me and my family members to becoming hardworking and focusing on education and hoping to be good citizens of this country was the emphasis placed on it by my religion, Islam. I have 3 siblings who are lawyers, and that made me go mad. I became a psychologist. I believe the best way to increase understanding and mutual respect is through interaction. Senator Hanson, I understand you declined Sam Dastyari's offer for a halal snack pack.
She's reconsidering.
No, I'm not.
With respect to that, would you be willing to take my offer to inviting you for lunch or dinner, whichever suits you best, with me and my Muslim family, and in respect to you and your beliefs, while we have something halal, I'll ensure what you have is something that's not halal. A haram snack pack. Would you kindly accept my invitation?
That's a kind invitation. Thank you very much. I'm quite happy to spend time with many Australians. And
with my one?
With your haram, what's a haram snack pack?
No, he said with
anything over a meat and a lunch, a dinner, just so we can increase our understanding. And my offer extends to all people who might dislike Islam and all Muslims.
Now, Pauline,
okay, sure,
go ahead.
No, made a comment that I dislike Islam and all Muslims. That is not the case whatsoever.
Okay.
And as I said,
I don't think he said that,
Muslims.
I don't think he said that.
What did you say? Okay, let's clarify it.
No. I said my offer extends to anyone who also might dislike Islam and all Muslims in a pursuit to create further understanding. So over any meal, whether it's halal or haram.
We can talk. You can get in touch with my office. See what happens. Yeah.
So, it's a nice sort of piece of reconciliation in what's been quite a tough argument. But I'm just so seriously, would you be prepared to sit down with Muslims and particularly with his family, since he's offered, and try and understand things from their perspective?
Look, I know there are people in this country who are Muslims of the Muslim faith that they want a peaceful life and they want to live without fear. And yes, I think that's wonderful. We are a multiracial nation, but the bottom line is that we must be Australian under one culture, way of life, and our laws.
Tony, I think the important question is, what's on the menu?
Yeah.
Well, I think he mentioned haram meats, the non-believer.
Tony, I think what Nick is trying to say, that Nick and I will come round to your place because I'll never say no to a snack pack.
Okay, I'll tell you what, I think that's a surprisingly optimistic note on which to leave that quite tense discussion. Remember, if you hear any doubtful claims, send a tweet using the hashtags FactCheck and QandA. Keep an eye on our Twitter account for the verdicts. The next question comes from Peter Hoban.
Thank you, Tony and panel. I feel my question now is rather insignificant compared to the topics we've been talking about, but here it goes anyway. To the independent senators, do you realise the opportunity that you have been given to actually make decisions not shackled by vested interest party backers? The Australian people have made a deliberate and accurate decision to virtually neuter the Liberal and Labor discourse of petty party politics. We're jack of it. If either party thinks they have a mandate, they're dreaming. The nation has been crying out for real but equitable change. Can you provide a workable alternative? How will you negotiate in good faith?
Start with Nick Xenophon.
It is an incredible opportunity. It's an awesome opportunity to do the right thing. And for me, it's not about left or right. It's about right or wrong. Where do you do things from the political centre? And I think there's been a vacuum in the political centre in this country. It's a great opportunity with my colleagues, with Sterling Griff, Skye Koshki-Moore. We will be pushing an agenda that I think is mainstream for reform of predatory gambling. Most Australians want to see reform. The major parties don't want to touch it. For Australian-made and Australian jobs, we are facing a crisis of manufacturing in this country, and we need to see a turbocharging of manufacturing through some sensible and measured government intervention. And when it comes to government accountability, why is it that in this country, if you're a whistleblower, instead of getting a medal, you go to jail? And we need to see changes to that which will change the culture of government. So I'm looking forward to the opportunity and working with my colleagues, all of them, to bring about some reforms.
So, Nick Xenophon, I'm going to bring you in because you heard the passion expressed in that of someone who wants to see something outside the major parties, wants to see change. And the big question is, will you use your voting power to push through those kind of reforms you just mentioned? Will you refuse to vote for various things the government wants unless you get your way? Yeah. That's the simple question.
Sure, it's a simple question, but sadly it doesn't lend itself to a simple answer.
Perhaps it should.
Well, it should, but it doesn't. I mean, in my first speech in the Senate 8 years ago, I said the trouble with horse trading is that sometimes you end up with a donkey, or worse still, you make an ass of yourself. I think the key issue here is that you use every opportunity to try and bring about reform. Sometimes it's incremental. You bring about change, you bring about reform, you insist on an amendment which will actually advance those causes. But sometimes you need to win both sides of politics to say that it's not in the national interest to sign up to a free trade agreement which will kill jobs, or to abandon manufacturing which will destroy many tens of thousands of jobs in this country.
OK, so I'm going to hear from the senators representing two new voting blocks in the Senate. Pauline Hanson. Well, first of all, you seem to be confident you're going to get up to 7 senators. That's a pretty big call, isn't it?
We've got 4 and possibly up to 7 seats, right, that we could win. Yes, it is.
Have you said a thank you note to Malcolm Turnbull?
I've been campaigning for the last 18 years, so I think I put a lot of work into it. And I've got to say thank you to Malcolm Turnbull for actually creating double dissolution, plus also changing the voting reform package that is actually more democratic to the voters, and rather than major political parties controlling the preferences. But the whole fact is, yes, it is going to be a huge responsibility to take my place in the Senate with the other senators. I have always said right from the very beginning that I will support anyone who is elected to the government, right, who is the government, which is Malcolm Turnbull. Now, insofar as to say that if they pass legislation that I believe is right for Australia and the Australian people, they will get my full support. If I don't, then I will look at making amendments to the changes, and I will explain to the people why. Peter was so right. This is why the major political parties lost so many votes at this election, because people are fed up with the major political parties. They feel they haven't been listened to and their voices are not being heard. So many changes need to be made in this country, and right across the board, every time I'm out in the public, there is another issue and another issue. I've pushed since prior to the election and since about changes to the Family Law Act, and I mentioned that in my maiden speech. Nothing has happened with that. I'm pleased to see now that the National Party are actually taking it up and looking at changing legislation to it, which I want to work with them on it, and I will be putting up my own policies.
So, we won't go into the detail of that, but let me just ask you this in a general sense. I'd ask the same question to Nick Xenophon. Will you use your voting power to force change, or will you just try and negotiate slowly over time with the government to see if you can incrementally change things? Because you could be in a position to actually say, well, I'm not going to vote for your major pieces of budget legislation or all sorts of other things unless you do what I want.
No, I won't do that, and I don't think that's right. I think what it's all about, if they put up legislation that is correct and I believe it's right for the people, I will support that. To be in this position is very important for the people. The people are relying on me and my other senators and every other senator in that parliament to make the right decision for their well-being and their future. And I don't believe you sell your soul because you might, make a little bit of gain somewhere else. You have to be there for accountability and honesty and for the people. And I'll always say that. OK,
very briefly, because the first test will come soon, when there's a joint sitting of the House, will your senators vote for the ABCC, the Building Corruption Commission,
I
which
think it needs
which was at the centre of the double dissolution. Will you
Tony,
vote for it?
I haven't had a chance to look at the legislation on it. I haven't even moved into an office. I don't have staff. I don't have resources as what the other senators have to be informed of what the bill is. I would like to sit down and have a talk with unions, and I would like to have a talk with the small businesses as well. It is apparently not working, and you know, I want to know what is the best way to move forward with this. You can't have unions dictating and controlling small business and running of the country or the government. So you have to find the balance there.
Okay. All right. Well, I think we've got partial answer there. Now let's go to the next largest, well, in fact, the largest independent voting bloc, or the Greens are not an independent voting bloc, they're the largest party on the crossbench. So what's the Greens' position going to be?
Thanks, Tony, and thanks, Peter, for your question. I think you're right to point out that the support for major parties has been dropping, and you echo the sentiment of so many other people who have started to look elsewhere. What's been mentioned and raised with me many, many times is that people feel that the big parties are not governing for the community anymore, or thinking about the environment. They're simply doing the bidding of the very large donors that contribute to their political coffers, and whether that's the gambling industry, in some cases the tobacco industry, of course the fossil fuel sector, the coal mining companies make very generous contributions, whether that's property developers. Those people get their views heard, they get access to ministers, they get to topple prime ministers in some cases, they get their agenda through the parliament, but the community, the environment, the fact that it's meant to be a representative democracy seems to be easily forgotten in the wake of those golden rivers of dollars that flow through. So I think that's part of the reason why the support for the big parties is dropping. I want to come back to a point that Ms Hanson raised earlier. I don't actually think that people supported her party because they share her racist views. I think what's happening is the economy is changing and people are nervous about it changing, and they're feeling left behind, particularly in regional areas. And I think what they haven't heard from either of the big parties is a plan for how we can bring people along in that change to a clean energy economy that we know the world is making. They feel left behind. They don't know what their place is. There's been a third of the coal workforce already sacked by the big coal companies. Now, where is the plan for their future? They could have a prosperous future in clean energy, in all sorts of other sunrise industries.
Well, you got someone to negotiate with on both sides of the equation, because an environment minister who's also the minister for energy.
Well, that's right, and I have mixed views about that. I think if we had a parliament that wasn't hostage to fossil fuel donations, that would be a wonderful combination and a powerful one, because obviously the key to environmental health and economic health is tackling global warming, the biggest challenge that the whole world is facing, and that's where we know our prosperity will lie and where genuine job creation will come in. But we're not hearing even that rhetoric, let alone the actual transition plans from the major parties.
Okay, so we'll move on to our...
That's why folk have been so discontented.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I'm going to move on to our next question, which is on this subject. We'll bring in the major parties on this one. From Laura Holt.
Good evening, Senators. As the Coalition and Opposition are not capable of a significant reduction in government spending of about $30 billion a year for the next 3 years, should the crossbench take up this challenge and consequently save the pension system, the NDIS, Medicare and health and education funding? Because when the money runs out, there will be no money for these services.
Let's start with Simon Birmingham first. Now, I mean, do you accept the premise there that you need to save $30 billion a year in order to save the big services which people expect, health, education and so on?
Well, we know that the budget is under pressure, Laura, and you absolutely hit the nail on the head there that there are significant savings required to still realise ultimately the budget projections we have to bring the budget back to surplus. Now, Labor went to the election proposing a raft of tax increases, and that was their model to ultimately perhaps get to surplus that would have put us on a path to have the highest level of taxation as a percentage of the economy in the nation's history, essentially. We rejected that. That's not our approach. We think Australia as a whole pays enough tax at present. We committed in the last budget to make sure we do more about multinational tax evasion, to make the superannuation tax system fairer and to deal with some excesses there. We want to make sure that the tax reform we have is fair, but we don't want to grow the actual scale of taxation in Australia because that can only harm our competitiveness. That does mean we need to restrain spending so that we can guarantee ongoing support for Medicare, for schools, for the NDIS, for the types of services you identified. And yes, I think the question does then come to, obviously, we have to work cooperatively with whomever in the Senate, the Labor Party, if they're willing to actually honour the areas they said they'd deliver as savings, the Greens, if they're willing to, any of the crossbenchers, as to how it is we can realise the types of savings that are required. But it takes two, or potentially a lot more than two in the new Senate, to tango, and we will need them to be part of the solution. We can hopefully extend successfully the olive branch to those willing to work with us to realise savings, but they will have to be willing to come on that journey as well, or else the type of concern, broken system if you like, Peter, that you spoke about in your question, will only get deeper as time goes on if in fact no agreement can be reached.
OK, well, I'm going to go to the other major party representative. Now, Sam Dastyari, will the Labor Party join in a kind of crusade to cut government spending?
We're certainly prepared to join in a crusade to actually pass as much legislation as we can. And, look, if this was... someone needs to perhaps remind Simon the election's over. You won. Congratulations.
So Sam, just a quick... Would it start with you guys supporting the areas of savings that you adopted yourselves?
Here's what we wouldn't support. I will get to this. A $50 billion tax cut for big business, $7.5 billion of which is going to go towards the 4 big banks, is not the right approach, no. But what we will do is this, and you talked about it takes 2 to tango, or perhaps even more in this Senate, and Simon, I will always dance with you. We are completely genuine.
Who's choosing the music?
OK.
90s or 80s, what are we going to do?
Sam, can I just interrupt you? Right now you're doing more talking than dancing. So can you just get to the point of which measures you will actually pass?
The measures that we took to this election, we intend to be passing through the Senate, but at the same time, we will work with the government to do the measures that need to happen, provided they fit within the platform of what we took to the election campaign.
So will you roll over on the superannuation reforms? That's one of their taxing promises.
Well, what we said regarding the superannuation reforms going into the election was that we took the government at face value in what they said that we need to do a proper review as they went into caretaker. The problem the government has currently on superannuation matters is actually their own backbench and their own MPs. But we were very clear going into the campaign that there does need to be a look at this issue of retrospectivity, but beyond that, those measures that are reasonable will be supported, and Mr Shorten and the Prime Minister, as I understand, have both made it very clear that in this new Senate we should be working together.
OK, now you want to hear an answer to the specific question you put, so let's hear, because I think you did say you would answer the question as to whether you would support the measures you previously supported.
Of course we'll support the measures that we took to the election.
So the savings measures of ours that you changed your mind on during the election campaign, you will now support?
The measures that we took to the election and we got a mandate from the Australian people on are our measures.
Sorry, is that a slippery answer?
No, not at all. It's going to be even clearer.
You've done it. You actually have backflipped on this thing.
We have taken a series of measures to the election. We got a mandate from the Australian people, and they are party platform. That is what we took to the polls. That is what Bill Shorten's election.
Are you convinced that you're actually on the same page here?
Well, I'm hopeful. I'm very hopeful from what I hear Sam saying. Now, admittedly, he talks about the clarity of the superannuation position they took to the election, where in fact Labor's position was, we'll bank these savings the government says, but if we get elected, we're not quite sure how we'll deliver those savings.
No, we said we'll take you at face value and we'll do a review.
Yeah, well, you said you had problems.
I'm sorry, but Simon Birmingham, you're reviewing this yourself, aren't you? The retrospective part, isn't that what Scott Morrison is doing right now? Because there's such a backlash in your own party about the retrospectivity issue.
Look, Tony, there are some technical concerns that might be tweaked, but
so is retrospectivity in principle a technical concern, or is it in fact just simply
I didn't want to get into debate. I reject the argument that the proposals are retrospective. Retrospective tax changes, as in fact the Prime Minister explained on 7:30 on this network only a couple of hours ago.
You can have this argument in the party room. Let's hear from the other panellists. And Pauline Hanson.
Refer to the Prime Minister's transcript then.
OK, all right. Pauline Hanson, so the whole series of things here, and Sam Dastyari raised one of them, the $50 billion tax cut to business, which is a key part of the government's platform. Will you support that?
And that goes out for how many years, Sam? OK. That's right, exactly 10. So we're talking about now. We need to address it now. The amount of money that this country owes, we cannot keep going the way that we're going, paying $13.5 billion a year in interest alone on our debt. The thing is, they talk about the age of entitlement is over. Well, let's start with the Parliament at the top, from the politicians. Let's prove the rest of the country that we can actually rein in our belts and start saving monies.
But does that,
now,
can I just interrupt there? Does that mean... Sorry, thank you. Does that mean with the $50 billion tax cut over 10 years that you'll reject that because it's...
No, that's small business, OK.
No, it's not.
That's going out over 10 years. What I've got to say is that a lot of the other spending...
So do you support that?
The government...
So just very briefly, do you support that one?
In principle, no, I don't. The way it is. No, I think there's other cuts that can be made, that we need to do it now, not over a period of 10 years. And I think that we need to do it. Foreign aid that we're giving, even monies that we're giving to corrupt countries, that we need to look at where that money is going and rein that in. We need to look at the welfare bill, $180 billion a year. That needs to be investigated because I think it's rorted with the welfare bill. That needs to be investigated as well. There's so many other, even government contracts and jobs, they are actually out of control, and I want to see accountability of what we're paying out the taxpayers' dollars to get these jobs done.
OK, now I'm going to go quickly to Nick Xenophon, because I'd just like to hear your position on whether government actually has a mandate for all these savings measures.
The governments have a mandate to introduce legislation, and the Senate has a mandate to scrutinise that legislation. That's how I see it.
And do you have a mandate, given the way the Senate is set up, to reject whatever you want to reject?
Well, if a majority of the Senate rejects it, then it's a brutal arithmetic of it. But I'll work constructively with the government. We need to look at reinventing government in the 21st century in this country. We need more transparent government, more accountable government. We need to make sure that money isn't wasted. But I'll work in good faith with the government.
Is a $50 billion tax cut to business, small and large, wasted?
I'll support it up to $10 million. But right now we are facing a tsunami of job loss. We're 10 million.
Oh, 10 million. 10 million. Sorry, give it 10 million businesses.
Okay. 10 million.
10 million size of business.
We are facing a tsunami of job loss in this country. Up to 200,000 jobs will be lost when the auto sector closes down at the end of next year. That, to me, is a greater priority for government involvement than a big tax cut.
And Larissa Waters.
Thank you, Laura, for your question. I thought it was an interesting one that you focused on cuts, when in fact what we hear a lot of talk about is cuts, but we don't hear a lot of talk about revenue raising. Now, we put a whole raft of revenue raising proposals throughout the course of the campaign, including getting rid of the $24 billion over the forward estimates, that's 4 years, in free money that goes to the fossil fuel sector in things like cheap diesel and accelerated depreciation. Nobody else gets those sorts of perks. $24 billion, there's one saving for you. $50 billion, of course, for
free
the
money is a fair.
cuts.
This is about whether or not the extent of tax that Australian businesses pay. And the more tax you make Australian businesses pay, the less competitive they'll be on the world stage.
Well,
that's the reality of it, Larissa.
They're not paying much tax and you're just giving it all back to them.
No, those businesses, businesses are paying taxes in royalties, they're paying taxes in company tax, their employees are paying income tax,
and
they're paying GST.
They're cooking the planet with climate change, which is going to cost us all.
Just briefly doing the sums for you here, I'm not sure quite how they work out, but if Pauline Hanson did have 7 senators and she doesn't want the big business tax cut element of it, if Nick Xenophon doesn't at his senators, if the Greens don't and Labor doesn't that mean that your biggest policy is sunk?
Well, Tony, we will put...
What an episode.
We will put our policies to the Parliament and we'll work with each of the crossbenchers. And you've heard from Nick that he is willing to talk about elements of that policy. I think you've heard from Pauline sympathy for small business and Australian small business, and certainly the type of tax cuts that we are talking about over the next few years are tax cuts that would overwhelmingly benefit family-owned Australian businesses.
It's a very simple question on the numbers here. It doesn't look like you've got the numbers to get the $50 billion tax cut through, right or wrong.
Well, I don't accept that we won't get anything through, Tony.
No, I'm talking about the full $50 billion, your big policy at the election.
Well, our policy at the election was staged over 10 years, as we've talked about on this panel tonight.
So you're ready to compromise on this?
We have said all along since election night that, of course, we will work with the Parliament we're given. We'll negotiate and work with the crossbenchers in a spirit of good faith. We'll present our policies as we took them to the election.
Maybe not super, though.
We'll present our policies as we took them to the election, including super.
With some tweaks.
As long as it creates jobs, you know, the tax cuts, but that's something that I need to look at. I'm not going to make policy on the run here. I haven't been in Parliament. I haven't had the resources. I haven't had access to, you know, the offices of the Prime Minister or to actually get the briefing with all this. So I'm not going to make policy on the run here. But if I can see that these tax cuts or whatever is going to create jobs, that's what we need to get this country going.
Who would you want to hear that from? Whose opinion would
Scott Morrison
you'd accept
rang
Scott
me
Morrison's
up and he said he would give me access to the Treasury and actually the budget, so to give me a briefing on that to see what it's about. And it's a huge job to do it. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you I'm going to, you know, knock it back or not going to do it. To make an informed decision about it, I will wait till I get in there and get a briefing from the government and make an informed decision about it.
So would you regard
infrastructure projects going, jobs going in this country? I wish you would look at, you know, I have a policy which is far better to get apprenticeship schemes going. I will present that to the government to look at this, because I think that's where we need to address it. Get industry, manufacturing going, get the country going again. You know, you talk about the Greens and the climate change, you're shutting down this country. You're creating more of a cost. Yeah, you nearly fell off the stool because you agree with me. Because you're creating more of a cost to
shutting the coal industry down, Pauline.
families
it's global
out
markets.
of their increased cost. You know, the whole, even climate change, that needs to debate it. Let's have the true facts about this.
We know that you don't accept the facts
Ms.
of
Hanson,
climate
on the
science,
$50
but
billion
everybody else
cuts,
does.
when you meet with Treasury, just ask this one question. Yes. How many billion of it are going to the 4 big banks? Just ask that one question, please.
I will ask that question as well. And I'd like to know why the pair of you, I said 20 years ago that multinationals were not paying their tax in this country. You come into the budget last year of $3.9 billion that you'll collect over the next, 3 years. That is peanuts compared to what they should be paying in this country. You're out by hundreds of billions of dollars.
OK, I'm really sorry to say to everybody on the panel that's all we have time for tonight. And on the evidence of tonight, it's certainly going to be a very interesting Senate. Please thank our panel: Sam Dastyari, Pauline Hanson, Larissa Waters, Simon Birmingham, Nick Xenophon. Now, for the next 2 weeks, I'll be taking a break. Virginia Trioli will be sitting in this chair. Good luck, Virginia. And with the new ministry only announced today, next week's panel is still under construction. So please join Virginia Trioli next week to get more answers on your questions here on Q&A. I'll see you again very soon. Good night.